Okay, it's 12 o'clock. Have a good event, guys.
Thank you, Patty. Hello, everyone, and welcome to APA Florida's Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee's Crafting a Strong Proposal Workshop for the 2022 Florida Planning Conference. My name is Alyssa Barber-Torres, and I'm your moderator today. To start, we will hear from Sylvia Vargas, who is chair of APA's EDI Steering Committee and the 2021 FPC co-chair. She'll give a brief overview of the 2021 FPC session tracks. Next, we'll hear from Bob Camberg and Roxanne Reed for a presentation on creating your conference session. Bob is a member of the APA Florida EDI Committee and a frequent FPC presenter. And Roxanne is an APA Florida EDI Committee co-chair, and she's also the 2020 and 2022 FPC chair. Then at 12:30, we'll open the floor for a discussion of your questions, your potential session ideas, before closing with some comments from Roxanne. During the question period, we'll ask you to please turn on your video if possible, raise your hand, and we'll unmute you for your comments and questions. Please feel free to put your questions, potential session ideas, and any tips you would like to share with your attendees today in the chat at any time for that discussion period. Thanks so much for joining us. And now I'll turn it over to Sylvia.
Hi, good morning. Well, I guess it's officially good afternoon now. Thank you to everyone who has joined us so far. We're very excited to be hosting the conference, hopefully in person in Miami this year. I hope to see all of you here. I've been asked to talk a little bit about our conference theme and our conference tracks. Bob started a conversation a few minutes ago before all of you joined us with a comment, interesting track names. And so I want to give you a little bit of background of how we arrived at those. Obviously, I hope it's obvious to everybody that the conference theme this year focuses and highlights and celebrates the diversity of our region, and particularly here in South Florida and Miami. It's really a strong part of our identity, this whole notion of the medianoche sandwich, which is the Cuban sandwich that has multiple layers of different kinds of meats and cheese and different kinds of condiments. And it really kind of goes to the core of who we are as a region, made up of multiple layers, all of them equally important to a great taste. So that's where the conversation started in framing our theme, focusing on our diversity, which is multicultural and tied in a lot of its identity to our food. So we hope to highlight that through our conference theme and through our track themes as well. We have 5 major tracks, actually, yes, 5. The first one is seat at the table. Because diversity, equity, and inclusion are so important to our overall framework, our overall theme, we wanted to frame that in terms of getting everybody to the table, giving everybody a seat at the table. So this track focuses on community engagement, focuses on ways to ensure equity in public engagement, especially with a focus on the shifts that everybody has had to make during the pandemic. We have had, I'm sure that I don't speak only for myself when I say we've had to really become creative and employ and come up with a lot of new tools to engage and to reach out to the community. So the sessions in this track will be focused on new ways to engage and provide access to the diverse populations in every community. The second one is What's in the Soup? And the focus of this track is on innovative strategies and equitable and inclusive solutions to planning in the areas of land use, housing, and transportation. So this is where we're looking to highlight that interface between these 3 major elements of planning. the connection between all three in particular. We also are interested in and will be focusing on issues related to workforce housing, affordable housing, access to communities. These are areas of particular concern in our region in particular in terms of the housing crisis. The third track is cream of the crop, and this one emphasizes regulatory topics from federal, state, local law, legislative previous updates, First Amendment issues, sign regulations, code enforcement, emergency orders related to the pandemic, the military, short-term housing, customary use, grant and funding strategies, etc. La Ventanita, this plays on something that is very unique to South Florida, I believe, which is the little window that you go up to get your coffee shot. And these are usually very active centers of community life in our neighborhoods. So the focus of this track is inclusive and equitable placemaking and the different facets that contribute to it. So here we envision including, for example, strategies related to CRAs and redevelopment, repurposing, arts, culture, economic development, complete streets, multimodal transportation, streetscapes, etc. And finally, we have waterfront dining, which concentrates on health, recovery, and the environment. The topics on this track are going to include things like health and recreation, ecotourism, trails, environmental planning topics, parks and recreation plans, agricultural planning, low impact development, stormwater, sea level rise, coastal resilience in general, sustainability, and recovery and planning for COVID and pandemic related issues, as well as other types of emergency management, etc. So those are the 5 tracks. And if anybody has any questions about those, I'll be happy to answer them as we go through, but I want to pass this on to Roxanne right now.
Hi. Alyssa did a great job of introducing all of us, so I just want to talk a little bit about the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee that we have formed for the state that Alyssa and I are the co-chairs of, and it looks like we have a few members of our committee here on this, so I appreciate all of you joining to hear about how to do a proposal for the conference. You know, we understand over the last year, we've seen something brought to the forefront, which is something we really probably hadn't dealt with as a society in a long time: inequity and intolerance. And this has been magnified by the pandemic that we've been through this last year. So APA Florida does recognize that there have been inequities in past planning practices. And the goal is to create inclusive, just, and equitable communities. And so our committee just wants to encourage topics for this conference that will address equity, and also encourage panelists that have diverse identities. So that's one thing that we want to encourage for this conference and conferences going forward. There'll be another push again for this, for the Orlando conference for 2022. So we have a really good speaker to share with us his insights on how to create that proposal. And I'm going to turn it over to Bob.
All right, Roxanne, thank you very much. Alyssa, Roxanne, are you sharing right now the Word version of the call for proposal? Everyone, I'm in the car right now, so forgive me. I assume that's up, and we're
Yes.
going to the second page.
Second page. Okay, let me make sure I'm on the second page here. Your second page, Bob, is that going to be the conference session submittal practice form?
Yes, it is.
All right.
And
we are there.
For the most part, okay, thank you. For the most part, everything is fairly straightforward on that in terms of, we're to start with Section A. Sylvia just went over the potential tracks and identifying what track are you going to be presenting in, and then what's the presentation format. Whether it's going to be a lecture, panel. My suggestion on, you have to look at time. For the most part, the sessions are about 75 minutes long. And therefore, how are you going to, what are you going to be presenting and how long is it going to take? And so you select on B, as the lecture panel, as a training, and are there other options? And like I just went over in terms of length of session, for the most part, we're going to be looking at the standard sessions and then title of the session. This is the opportunity to brand, to make it pop. When people are trying to decide among the options that are there, this is what's going to catch their eye initially. So think about how you sell what's going to be your topic and what you're presenting. Under section E, the best I always think about this is what's the story or stories that are going to be told. And broadly speaking, those stories can be from the point of view of a planning, that the presentation is presenting about planning program or activities and how they're implemented for EDI constituents. And for the most part, what we've been talking about as a committee when we talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion, we're looking at women, we're looking at people of color, indigenous people, we're looking at our LGBTQ population, we're looking at people with disabilities. And so how are those constituents programs being implemented on their behalf is one possible track or one way of thinking at it, of it. But also, conversely, what's happening with respect to planning programs and activities that are being implemented that aren't necessarily serving EDI constituents well. That's another point of view that you may want to consider and look at. And then the other side that may be an angle to present is, as a planning professional, as a potential member of the target population, how is profession serving you and your professional development with respect to a topic or range of topics? How has it served, or conversely, what is it not doing and what could we be doing better? Those are potential ideas or ranges of ideas that you can present and take into account. Once again, you're going to have to focus what you're saying. This is where you're going to tell the story, and you only get 100 words to do it. As I'm a little verbose, as you can tell, but I found in the past that I wind up putting out an idea and then, using the word count function in Word and realizing that there was a lot of editing that needs to be done. So be judicious and succinct in order to sell your topic. Now going to the next page, and we're going to be looking at letter F. Under there, that's pretty straightforward, but my recommendation is, if you're looking at doing a panel format, that you block out what you're going to try to cover among the panelists that are going to be presenting, and who gets how much time, and is that going to be sufficient allocation within 75 minutes? And then also, ideally, I think what you're really looking at in terms of the presentation block, you're actually going to probably be looking at 60 minutes of presentation and leaving yourself at least 15 minutes for people attending to be able to ask questions and also be able to engage interactively however you want. I believe that items G and H are fairly straightforward, and I as well. Those right there are just simply just providing information. And then we'll go to the next page. And we're looking at J. Take into account the request here about audiovisual. When I was thinking about this, I realized that from my point of view, this is how historically conferences have been held. I mean, these basic level, and I don't mean basic, but these standard items that are being used. Think about your presentation and whether or not there is an opportunity to use technology to do things differently that may be able to bring a refreshing point of view to the table. And don't be afraid to ask for additional technology in your proposal. List what it is, but also because there's not a word limit there, just have a little codicil there that basically winds up saying that you still will be able to go forward using the standard equipment in the event that the stuff that you're requesting is not available. And that kind of also, you would mirror that same information in K. If you're going to be doing something innovative or different in K, that's where you would address about whether or not you need a special setup. And it also could be potentially in terms of room setup. If you're trying to do something either in an interactive format or something else other than people sitting in a lecture seating, I think area K is where you go ahead and present that information. When we move down to L, the things that I've found that can be used to guide this is remembering if you start with the AICP code, that kind of frames what the responsibilities are as planners. And even if you're not an AICP member or FAICP member, you still should be trying to strive to help implement the code on behalf of the people that we work for, that being the public, as well as our professional development. And so areas that I often rely on and believe are supportive of a proposal are referencing AICP code sections A1F about seeking social justice, also 1H in which you're trying to make sure that the planning process is available for all people and participants. Another area is basically looking at AICP code B, 3B, educating the public about planning issues, and 3D under the AICP code as well, sharing the resources and experience and research, and also 3G and 3I are good areas to look at. In addition, and I believe that we'll send this out to participants. I thought about it as I was going over this, but we'll go ahead and send you some of the objectives and outcomes from the EDI, the National EDI Committee, as well as the State EDI Committee, our strategies, our objectives and implementation strategies, and that may be the basis for you to be able to basically explain and highlight how the concept, the proposal that you're looking at, how that furthers those activities and those outcomes. Moving to M, this is the area where you want to highlight what you're bringing to the table in terms of equity, diversity, inclusion with your presentation. and take into account that that there are dedicated people that are volunteering to review these proposals. This is once again your opportunity to sell to them. It's an opportunity for you to highlight that we're furthering what is a need in our profession to have diverse voices and inclusive voices and content being presented at the conference, so that we all, not only us as planners, are going to grow and improve, but we're actually going to be able to assist those populations. And then turning to the next page, section N is once again doing the same thing. I'm sorry, I just explained M. What I just said for M applies to N as well. And basically, you're going to highlight the story that's being told, why it needs to be told, and how you're going to effectively share that message. And with that, I'm going to conclude, and I'll be able to answer any questions from the attendees.
Excuse me, this is Jeremy Pease with Assisted Rides. I had a question sort of regarding the fact that I would consider myself a potential vendor, but I am knowledgeable on the topics of transportation and scheduling, and specifically, I think 2020 and 2021, there's a big focus on rural transportation. Do you think it would be, do you think this would be a good topic to present? Because I've never been to the Florida Planning Conference.
I'll just jump in real quick before Sylvia. This is one of the topics that we get consistently about rural planning, that we need to include that in the conferences. So I think this would be a great topic.
Thank you.
Yeah, I will just add, first of all, welcome, Jeremy. We hope to see you in September, end of August, beginning of September. But yeah, Roxanne is absolutely correct. I mean, our state is very diverse. And even though here in South Florida, we're all about sort of the big city, you know, even here have in our region, very rural communities, and throughout the state, there are a lot of planners who work in rural communities who need tools, who need help and support in helping their communities through planning and through the lens of equity, diversity, and inclusion. So yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
And as Jeremy, very quickly, this is Bob. I would highlight the fact that the equity issue of ensuring that people in rural areas have the best access possible to the services that are needed, and how your proposal is going to discuss how things are being done, what works and what doesn't work. So I think that would be a great topic.
Jeremy, this is Alyssa. I'll add on to Bob's comments and say, of course, and Sylvia's, to say welcome, and we look forward to hearing more about the work that your company does. Just as a note to vendors in general, if the session is seen as kind of an overt sales pitch or more focused on the services provided than by one company, as opposed to an engagement of the issues and a panel that really features, you know, a variety of different stakeholders, that would be more well received than just something that talks about a company and a case study of your work specifically. So hopefully that clarifies the approach.
Yes, thank you very much.
And I don't see any other comments or questions in the chat right now. I would encourage attendees to unmute yourself and join in the conversation, or again, like Jeremy, I'll present a potential session idea for the panelist discussion.
Yeah, if I could jump in. My name's David Twiggs. Been a part of APA for many, many years. But I've specialized in working with master plan community development, and also from a public side, kind of the impacts of master plan communities. And the reason that I was interested in this conference with this theme, I'm based out of Scottsdale, Arizona right now, which is another, you know, kind of retirement tourism mecca into there. We're having a large discussion among large master plan communities about equity, about diversity, because we're seeing a big change in the mindset of our, I guess, potential retirees. You hate to even use that word anymore, retiree, because, you know, people are coming in and with having, you know, they're 60 years old and not empty nesters yet. So you got a whole change of the demographic and the psychographics that are going on. And while it's part of this is part of my planning work is pretty easy working with developers of new communities, because they get to start anew and bring in a lot of these ideas of the equity and diversity in that, which is starting to be demanded by that mindset. But where the challenges, and I feel like the challenges for the planning industry are, you know, parts of Florida, parts of Arizona, parts of a lot of these were inundated with these older master plan communities. Old model master plan communities built during the 80s and 90s when there was a formula the banks understood, and we're just going to build a golf course and 4,000 houses per. Everybody knows what we're looking at that. Well, these are we're starting to see a major problem in there. They're almost a crisis identity in there, because they're not being relevant to markets. In some cases, they're going down in market value. The reason that has bigger impacts is, you know, you've got billions of dollars in market value tied up in these basically privately governed entities. And but that has direct implications for the municipalities and the counties. As that value goes down, tax values go down, and inequities can increase, and you create these dead zones within an area. So really the focus that I'm looking at is how APA can supply at least guidance to these independent. Again, we typically deal with the developer, and we're trying to get the best community that's out there. But we've got hundreds of thousands of people living in these. We've got hundreds of, like I said, billions of dollars in tax value, and it's a big planning void that's out there, because nobody is reaching into those privately governed entities for good planning practices. How would that fit? You know, again, I looked at it from the standpoint of, you know, equity and diversity and all that thing. All of those are part of our existing discussion, and how that would fit into a conference like yours.
Well, thank you for that question, David. Roxanne, perhaps you could take.
Yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from with the retirement community. That's a large part of what I do here in Florida. My work is for a city that's working to continue to expand the villages. And so it's, I think, you know, what you're saying is nationwide, as we see these communities continue to grapple with these ideas of equity, diversity, and inclusion. You know, how best do we bring that forward to talk about, you know, how other people view that. So I think it would be a great topic to bring to this conference, because Florida is, you know, largely a retirement community in different pockets of the state. So it's something to start that conversation, which I don't think we really have started a conversation about building retirement communities and how they're seen as diverse or inclusive. That is a struggle as the planning community to really try to focus that. What we've done here in the city where I work is try to make that diversity throughout the town that supports the villages. And that's something that we look at doing. So that's one way to kind of look at it. How do you blend all that together? So, you know, I think that's definitely something to take a look at, to try to bring in some different voices to talk about that from different aspects.
If I may ask.
Thanks, right. Go ahead.
Yeah, if I may add, I think it's a great topic for one thing. I love that you're in Arizona, and you know, we have again, you know, sort of these national themes, and definitely I see the relevance. Years ago, I actually was doing in the retrofit of antiquated subdivisions here in Florida, which is another big problem that, you know, we see nationwide. But, you know, we used to be legendary for the flybys, you know, people back in the 40s, 50s, 30s, even, you know, just kind of swooping in and saying, oh, then there's your lot. I heard stories of painted roads and that kind of thing, and paying $25 for a lot, quarter-acre lot. So there's issues of infrastructure in those, there's issues of connectivity, there's issues of land use. I think, you know, there are facets of what you're talking about as well that have something in common with those. And I'm even sort of trying to look at our tracks that we have here. You know, it could be something that goes in under what's in the soup. And one of the things that we really didn't talk about that I should have mentioned, you know, there's a lot of overlap or in interface between all of these tracks. So you really can figure out where to go by putting together your panel and kind of figuring out what those perspectives are going to be to your topic. So
and that no, so that was one of my questions. While I think the subject is very pertinent in as a national type of deal, and with my efforts of trying to bring the whole concept of placemaking into the evolution of those, I think an actual panel would be a very good way to do this. Could if I were to take this further with you, are there resources here with the committee that could help me put together that pertinent panel? I've got a couple of ideas, but you know, those are just personal contacts. I would like to, you know, talk to some of the key players in the state on that panel, you know, so it's really got meat for your conference.
Thanks for that suggestion, David. What I'll ask is that panelists put any suggestions in the chat, or if any of the other attendees have some suggestions for David, please go ahead and use our chat to be able to enter those. And we'll move on now to our next question. The next question we have is from Shantae Eldridge. She asks, how, as a potential panelist, can she let members know that she is interested in serving on a panel?
Well, I think being here today and putting the question out is the first step. But one of the things that I do sometimes when I'm thinking about an idea is reaching out to my networks in general, because through some of my contacts, sometimes I find other contacts that are working in precisely the areas that I'm thinking of. I do that through social media and direct messaging. Yes, I think that the first step is to come up with the idea that you have and then figuring out who you need to reach out to. Because, you know, it cannot be just a sort of generic, oh, I'm interested in a panel. I mean, you know, what is it that you're trying to present? What are your ideas about the panel? It usually works better in collaboration. I think that's something I'm going to suggest. This is something that is national, but we've done it in the state conference, as well as when we see certain themes come in proposals. Sometimes we see a lot of overlap between, and we can make suggestions as to combining or consolidating even if possible. So that's also a possibility.
And this is Bob. A suggestion would be if someone, I mean, I believe it was Shantae, but forgive me, I got the name wrong. But if you and anyone else who's participating has an idea that you want to present about, if you will list that in the chat area, I believe that would be able to helpful. And then what we can see if there are individuals that, they don't have anyone else yet, we may see if we can pair them with other individuals on a, kind of a hybrid or joint idea. So if we can keep a list, Alyssa, people who are looking to present but don't have fellow presenters yet, we may be able to then connect people so they can collaboratively work on a proposal before the 31st.
That's a great suggestion, Bob. Happy to do that. And I know APA Florida, would like to serve as a resource for folks, especially if you're first-time presenters, new presenters, non-traditional presenters, to add to the value and the energy of the event and the diversity, as Sylvia mentioned in the theme.
And by the way, I see in a subsequent comment that Shante is an expert on digital equity, which is a perfect topic for our conference. So if anybody's interested in partnering with her on that, I think that we would definitely welcome a proposal.
And I think another good place to try to get connected with people is APA Florida's LinkedIn page.
Yes.
I think if we could get something going there to try to get people organized in the next couple weeks so that their presentation is ready, I think that LinkedIn page would be a great way to start that conversation.
That's a great suggestion, Roxanne. I know Patty just posted in the chat. So again, would encourage folks to look to the chat, some great resources being shared there. So does anyone have another question or concept for our panelists? If so, yes, go ahead.
I have a question here. First of all, thank you very much for directing me to all these different channels to find additional presenters, because that's actually a part of my question. So my name is Carrie Fong. I am a professor at Florida State University. I specialize in economic development. And last year, because of the COVID, my team had been worked closely with the governor's office, focusing on diversifying Florida's economy. And we are working on both long-term change and short-term change. So in terms of long terms, we're thinking about, we focus too much on tourism, and that's why we got hit so hard. So we're thinking about identifying other possibilities of other emerging industrial clusters. And the governor's office are interested in looking at some innovative high-tech industries that are starting to emerging in the state. And my team have been helping with those identifications. And in the short term, we also study small businesses and how they are hit really hard, and how small businesses are hit differently in different type of communities. And we do focus on minority communities, and we do find small businesses in minority communities are hit the hardest. And accordingly, we design policies to how do we prioritize them in the financial support that the state can give. So my teams are interested in putting together a panel to discuss these topics at the Florida APA conference. We think it's very timely. It's very important to engage everybody in this opportunity. We have both academic research, empirical evidence, and we are connected with the policymakers. So I think this would be great. I want to get you guys' response. And additionally, so far my team are all based at FSU. So I am also interested in finding somebody else to further diversify this panel that we're putting together.
Well, I'll start. I think that
I would.
Fabulous topic as well, and I hope to see it come in as a proposal, and I hope it gets on the program. I think that this could fit under several of our tracks, depending on how you structure the panel. You said that you were working with the governor's office. Can you bring somebody from the governor's office to be part of your panel?
I will try. I'll reach out and see if they have the time and capacity to do that.
Yeah, and I'm also kind of even wondering if are you working sort of in abstract? You said you're working that your research is looking at small businesses. Can we maybe have some specific case studies, or maybe bring somebody from the small business community to speak about? I'm just kind of thinking here, on the go. So
That's
I know
a good idea.
Bob had a comment, and I interrupted you, so sorry about that, Bob.
No, you didn't interrupt me. You gave me a great lead in, but in terms of, like, I was going to say, as part of your presentation, if you could make sure that you're including the information that you talked about, about how minority communities, lower income communities, businesses serving those are affected, and how economic development efforts are going to address what their needs are. I think highlighting that as part of your presentation, and potentially in terms of if you want to diversify, bringing someone from either an organization or a small business owner that is part of that demographic to the table to talk about what are their needs and how the planning profession can be addressing those needs as part of economic development. I think that also helps to better inform and educate the presentation.
Thank you, Bob. Great suggestion.
And Carrie, I'll just jump in and say that I think this is a great idea. I sent you in the chat box the name of someone at UCF who also does economic development for planners, and that might be a good contact for you,
Thank you.
to get a hold of.
Yes, I will reach out. Thank you.
Carrie, this is Alyssa. I'll just add one more suggestion to the great ones that you've heard already, and that's in the session description. I mean, you may want to stress the takeaways, the action steps that you'll be providing for planners, to be able to address those needs, and say that stress your particular focus on the takeaways, things that people can put into action right away on their job. And it sounds like it's a great mix of kind of big picture thinking about where we need to go, as well as specific strategies to be able to help communities and businesses retool in light of what we've all just experienced. So it sounds like a great suggestion for a panel. Good luck with it.
Thank you.
And I was going to say, just for the comments, if you add as a resource, I know you mentioned UCF, but also add Luis, our committee member that works for East Central Florida Regional Planning Council and does economic development planning for that region. I think it's a 6 or 7 county region. He might be a good resource or a panelist as well.
Yeah, thanks. I know Luis.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on what Alisa just said, because I think this applies equally to all of the potential session proposals. It's something that I find is really important in building a strong proposal, whether it is for a chapter conference or a national conference, and that is really focusing on outcomes and tools. I think that every audience that I see is always really hungry for tools that they can use and to understand the applicability, the transferability of those tools from community to community. So generally speaking, I would emphasize that, which is part of kind of thinking about what your teaching outcomes, your learning objectives are, and applies to everyone that is on this call and all of the proposers. proposers.
Thank you, Sylvia. That's a great way to go forward. And as you said, that approach works for every session proposal. So hopefully everyone will put that into practice. I notice we've got about 10 more minutes in our discussion before turning it over to Roxanne to close us out. So again, would encourage folks to jump in with any questions or suggestions you may have.
Excuse me, this is Jeremy again. I don't necessarily have a topic question. I just wanted to get a feeling of, you guys thought this was going to happen in person or online? Sort of gut feelings. Tough question, I know, sorry.
I have to say, Jeremy, could you do me a favor? My phone broke up for a second. Could you repeat what you just said?
Yeah, I just asked a sort of gut feeling if you thought the conference was going to happen online or in person.
Well, we're still considering all the factors. As you know, things are evolving from day to day. I suspect that by the time we get to August, we'll be in a position to hold a conference in person. This is just my impression based on where things seem to be going at this point. I could be wrong, but not to speak on behalf of the chapter, we're holding conversations with the venue very shortly because obviously this is, it's not just about us, it depends on all these other external factors. So conversations with the venue, conversations with the associated reception venues, mobile workshops, all of those things have to be they have to come together. There are issues associated with transportation for the mobile workshops, for example. If we have to transport people to tour sites, are we going to have to provide that transportation at half capacity and double the number of buses? So all of that is still very much up in the air. But our hope is certainly that in a few months, we will be in a place that will allow us to make that decision much more confidently. And I think that's probably going to be around May.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you for the detailed thing. I hope it happens in person myself.
Me too.
Well, hopefully, in spite of everyone's crossed fingers for an in-person event, we can still type some suggestions or questions in the chat, or again, unmute to be able to ask the last question of our panelists before we turn it over to Roxanne. And if there's no comments or questions coming in yet, I'll pose a question to the group, and that's what suggestions do you have for session organizers who might be sending a pitch email to potential panelists, along with, having their session concept and their contact information? What strategies would you recommend? Roxanne, can I ask you to speak to the question first?
You saw my mind going, right? I would have to just continue with my pitch for diversity. I know we've all been to conferences in the past, and some may not have ever been to a Florida planning conference. But sometimes we go to these conferences and they seem to be the same people submitting the same things. And I know that gets really concerning for people who attend. So that's really why we're putting this on, to really encourage that diversity, to get some different people on your panels that aren't necessarily always at these conferences. I know Sylvia had put in the chat box to the diversity of professional backgrounds. And I think that's just what makes us so much better at planning, when we can hear different voices. If we always have the same people on the panel that have the same outlook, that really tends to stagnate, and we really need that diversity so that we can hear from different professionals. Just an example that I have from the last conference we had in 2020 was as soon as we got done with that conference, and that was the virtual conference, we had an immediate request from a developer who wanted to do single family for rent, and we had never heard of that. And so I guess we were the last city in Florida to hear of it, as I found out trying to do some research about it. But that is a huge real estate now, that is huge on the real estate horizon, that this is what people want. had we had somebody at the conference at least giving us a little heads up of, oh, look, this is what's coming down the pike for real estate, I think that would have been so helpful to all of us to be ready for that. So I think sometimes it's good to hear from different professions what we're seeing in the future, what we as planners can expect to come up in the future, so that we're not surprised when we get back home and find out there's something new out there that we should have heard about at a conference. So I would just encourage you to think outside the box, and not just think of other planners to be on your panel, but to think of people from different professions that can bring different viewpoints.
That's a great point, Roxanne. And for folks who might be approaching those who aren't familiar with APA Florida, of course, it's probably helpful to include a link to the FPC webpage to be able to let people do their own research. I think the average attendance that I've heard, recently has been around the 800 attendees mark in terms of the number of people attending the event, which is also a good thing to let folks know who may not have attended in the past. Of course, if you include, a comment about why you're thinking of them for the panel, that you admire their work and kind of how you see them fitting in the big picture of your session concept, I'm sure that's always helpful. And then just letting them know a couple of deadlines if they do choose to participate in terms of when the conference proposal, is due, but then when they may want to touch base. And of course, offering to follow up with more information if needed. It's great that if you can provide a little notice to potential panelists to be able to get a bio together if they don't have one, or to customize it for this. I don't think there's any hard and fast rules about how early you have to let people know. I think the record is someone asked me to join a conference session for FPC 1 hour before the deadline closed. So that's probably an all-time record, but I wouldn't recommend that to others, although it did turn out to be quite a great experience and a great session. So again, would encourage folks, as I did in the chat, not to be intimidated at all. I think people want to join your team, want to hear about your ideas, especially if you can make it very easy for them, very plug and play to join your session in our event. So last call for any questions. Oh, go ahead, Bob.
I was going to say, last thing I would add on in terms of winning strategies, building off a couple of things, as Roxanne has said, one of them being ideas or concepts that planners may not be exposed to. And building on that also is, if you haven't been to APA conference before, you may not know what is the customary things that have happened in the past. And so nevertheless, think about the things that you believe are emerging trends, are things that you're doing that needs to be heard. I mentioned earlier about digital diversity, excellent issue, but also fleshing that out in terms of providing a range of whether it's end users or people who are connected to the planning profession, but not also a planner, giving those voices. The other thing is, if you're relatively young or new to the profession, don't be afraid to come up with an idea. I'll tell you, in the past week, I've talked to 2 young planners. One is a PhD candidate at FSU who is doing research regarding LGBT advisory committees in Atlanta and the efficacies of those committees, and the research is targeted toward that. And so she's looking at presenting and saying, here's something that a community is doing on behalf of the LGBT population. Is it effective? Again, as Sylvia said earlier, is it something that could be replicated or should be replicated? Another young planner also looking at presenting in the, regarding LGBTQ issues is doing interesting work in the area of safe schools and safe places for LGBTQ youth. And how are those things being addressed? And right now, one of the biggest challenges that they're facing is bathroom issues, as well as issues of trans students and how they're being treated at schools and elsewhere. And so they're looking at trying to pair. There's other innovative ideas that I've heard from people, and they're like, well, does anybody want to hear about that? I think the fact that you're asking that someone wants to hear about it means it's something that needs to be told. And so start there And then I think also if you don't have fellow presenters yet, I'll volunteer, and I know other EDI committee members will be available to help you flesh out your idea. And so is there something we're using as a contact point for the EDI committee? We make sure they get the information and we can turn it around and respond to them and help them with fleshing out proposals as well as linking them to other presenters. Is there a way to handle that, Alyssa?
Yes, that's a great suggestion. What I would recommend to folks is I put a link to the APA Florida EDI page in the chat. Of course, it's also available on the website. There's a feedback form in there where anyone can enter any comments and suggestions, and that goes directly to me and Roxanne. So I think that's a great suggestion, and we're happy to follow up on it and make things easier for potential presenters. So thanks so much for those comments, Bob. And with that, I'll thank everyone for attending and turn it over to Roxanne to close us out on time. Thank you.
Can I before you do that, say just one
Yes.
thing? I think speaking on behalf of the host committee, what we're hoping to see is both the diversity in professional backgrounds, but also diversity of content, diversity in the population makeup of the proposers. So it's all around diversity and thinking out of the box and applying that EDI lens all around. So just wanted to add that on behalf of our committee in terms of our thinking for the conference. We really are excited to see what all of you come up with. And thank you for making me part of today's panel.
Thank you, Sylvia. So glad you're able to join us and to present the perspective of both your national work and the conference committee, both of which are so valuable to us and to members. So appreciate that. Thanks to all presenters today, and we'll turn it over to Roxanne for a last thought. Thanks, everyone.
Well, I thank all of you guys for being on. I think this is a really great head start to thinking about how to make your proposals fit into the code of ethics, as Bob talked about, and then also fit into the EDI objectives, both nationally and for the state of Florida. Having Sylvia on board with the conference this year is just great. That's going to give what we need, the impetus to really make this conference the starting point, I think, for APA Florida to really showcase that we are serious about equity, diversity, and inclusion. We started a little bit with the 2020 conference last year in Orlando. Of course, that all got changed on us because of having to go virtual. And we got a little bit of a start, but I think the one in Miami this year will be our focus. And then we'll just carry that on going forward. So I think we've got a lot of good ideas here today, ideas that we really need to flesh out and move forward with. I would encourage everybody to kind of get on to the APA Florida LinkedIn page, kind of coordinate there, and we can continue to have that conversation and help each other as we're trying to get these proposals together, to concentrate and answer all those questions about equity, diversity, inclusion. So with that, I just want to thank everybody for being a part of this today, and hopefully we'll see you on LinkedIn.